The Crown of Wild Olive, by John Ruskin. Lecture 3. War. Delivered at the Royal Military Academy, Woolwich. Young soldiers, I do not doubt but that many of you came unwillingly tonight, and many in merely contemptuous curiosity, to hear what a writer on painting could possibly say, or would venture to say, respecting your great art of war. You may well think within yourselves, that a painter might, perhaps without immodesty, lecture younger painters upon painting, but not young lawyers upon law, nor young physicians upon medicine, least of all, it may seem to you, young warriors upon war. And, indeed, when I was asked to address you, I declined at first, and declined long, for I felt that you would not be interested in my special business, and would certainly think there was small need for me to come to teach you yours. Nay, I knew that there ought to be no such need, for the great veteran soldiers of England are now men every way so thoughtful, so noble, and so good, that no other teaching than their knightly example, and their few words of grave and tried counsel should be either necessary for you, or even, with ut assurance of due modesty in the offerer, endured by you. But being asked, not once nor twice, I have not ventured persistently to refuse, and I will try, in very few words, to lay before you some reason why you should accept my excuse, and hear me patiently. You may imagine that your work is wholly foreign to, and separate from mine. So far from that, all the pure and noble arts of peace are founded on war. No great art ever yet rose on earth, but among a nation of soldiers. There is no art among a shepherd people, if it remains at peace. There is no art among an agricultural people, if it remains at peace. Commerce is barely consistent with fine art, but cannot produce it. Manufacture not only is unable to produce it, but invariably destroys whatever seeds of it exist. There is no great art possible to a nation but that which is based on battle. Now, though I hope you love fighting for its own sake, you must, I imagine, be surprised at my assertion that there is any such good fruit of fighting. You supposed, probably, that your office was to defend the works of peace, but certainly not to found them. Nay, the common course of war, you may have thought, was only to destroy them. And truly, I who tell you this of the use of war, should have been the last of men to tell you so, had I trusted my own experience only. Hear why. I have given a considerable part of my life to the investigation of Venetian painting, and the result of that inquiry was my fixing upon one man as the greatest of all Venetians, and therefore, as I believed, of all painters whatsoever. I formed this faith, whether right or wrong matters at present nothing, in the supremacy of the painter Tintoret, under a roof covered with his pictures. And of those pictures, 3 of the noblest were then in the form of shreds of ragged canvas, mixed up with the laths of the roof, rent through by 3 Austrian shells. Now it is not every lecturer who could tell you that he had seen 3 of his favorite pictures torn to rags by bomb shells. And after such a sight, it is not every lecturer who would tell you that, nevertheless, war was the foundation of all great art. Yet the conclusion is inevitable, from any careful comparison of the states of great historic races at different periods. Merely to show you what I mean, I will sketch for you, very briefly, the broad steps of the advance of the best art of the world. The first dawn of it is in Egypt. And the power of it is founded on the perpetual contemplation of death, and of future judgment, by the mind of a nation of which the ruling caste were priests, and the second, soldiers. The greatest works produced by them are sculptures of their kings going out to battle, or receiving the homage of conquered armies. And you must remember also, as one of the great keys to the splendor of the Egyptian nation, that the priests were not occupied in theology only. Their theology was the basis of practical government and law, so that they were not so much priests as religious judges, the office of Samuel, among the Jews, being as nearly as possible correspondent to theirs. All the rudiments of art then, and much more than the rudiments of all science, are laid first by this great warrior nation, which held in contempt all mechanical trades, and in absolute hatred the peaceful life of shepherds. From Egypt art passes directly into Greece, where all poetry, and all painting, are nothing else than the description, praise, or dramatic representation of war, or of the exercises which prepare for it, in their connection with offices of religion. All Greek institutions had first respect to war. And their conception of it, as one necessary office of all human and divine life, is expressed simply by the images of their guiding gods. Apollo is the god of all wisdom of the intellect, he bears the arrow and the bow, before he bears the lyre. Again, Athena is the goddess of all wisdom in conduct. It is by the helmet and the shield, oftener than by the shuttle, that she is distinguished from other deities. There were, however, two great differences in principle between the Greek and the Egyptian theories of policy. In Greece there was no soldier caste, every citizen was necessarily a soldier. And, again, while the Greeks rightly despised mechanical arts as much as the Egyptians, they did not make the fatal mistake of despising agricultural and pastoral life, but perfectly honored both. These two conditions of truer thought raise them quite into the highest rank of wise manhood that has yet been reached, for all our great arts, and nearly all our great thoughts, have been borrowed or derived from them. Take away from us what they have given, and I hardly can imagine how low the modern European would stand. Now, you are to remember, in passing to the next phase of history, that though you must have war to produce art, you must also have much more than war, namely, an art instinct or genius in the people. And that, though all the talent for painting in the world won't make painters of you, unless you have a gift for fighting as well, you may have the gift for fighting, and none for painting. Now, in the next great dynasty of soldiers, the art instinct is wholly wanting. I have not yet investigated the Roman character enough to tell you the causes of this. But I believe, paradoxical as it may seem to you, that, however truly the Roman might say of himself that he was born of Mars, and suckled by the wolf, he was nevertheless, at heart, more of a farmer than a soldier. The exercises of war were with him practical, not poetical. His poetry was in domestic life only, and the object of battle, paces impona amorum. And the arts are extinguished in his hands, and do not rise again, until, with Gothic chivalry, there comes back into the mind of Europe a passionate delight in war itself, for the sake of war. And then, with the romantic knighthood which can imagine no other noble employment, under the fighting kings of France, England, and Spain, and under the fighting dukeships and citizenships of Italy, art is born again, and rises to her height in the great valleys of Lombardy and Tuscany, through which there flows not a single stream, from all their Alps or Apennines, that did not once run dark red from battle, and it reaches its culmina. Ting glory in the city which gave to history the most intense type of soldiership yet seen among men, the city whose armies were led in their assault by their king, led through it to victory by their king, and so led, though that king of theirs was blind, and in the extremity of his age. And from this time forward, as peace is established or extended in Europe, the arts decline. They reach an unparalleled pitch of costliness, but lose their life, enlist themselves at last on the side of luxury and various corruption, and, among wholly tranquil nations, wither utterly away. Remaining only in partial practice among races who, like the French and us, have still the minds, though we cannot all live the lives, of soldiers. It may be so, I can suppose that a philanthropist might exclaim. Perish then the arts, if they can flourish only at such a cost. What worth is there in toys of canvas and stone if compared to the joy and peace of artless domestic life? And the answer is, truly, in themselves, none. But as expressions of the highest state of the human spirit, their worth is infinite. As results they may be worthless, but, as signs, they are above price. For it is an assured truth that, whenever the faculties of men are at their fullness, they must express themselves by art. And to say that a state is without such expression, is to say that it is sunk from its proper level of manly nature. So that, when I tell you that war is the foundation of all the arts, I mean also that it is the foundation of all the high virtues and faculties of men. It was very strange to me to discover this, and very dreadful, but I saw it to be quite an undeniable fact. The common notion that peace and the virtues of civil life flourished together, I found, to be wholly untenable. Peace and the vices of civil life only flourish together. We talk of peace and learning, and of peace and plenty, and of peace and civilization, but I found that those were not the words which the muse of history coupled together, that on her lips, the words were, peace and sensuality, peace and selfishness, peace and corruption, peace and death. I found, in brief, that all great nations learned their truth of word, and strength of thought, in war, that they were nourished in war, and wasted by peace, taught by war, and deceived by peace, trained by war, and betrayed by peace, in a word, that they were born in war, and expired in peace. Yet now note carefully, in the second place, it is not all war of which this can be said, nor all dragon's teeth, which, sown, will start up into men. It is not the ravage of a barbarian wolf flock, as under Genseric or Suwarrow. Nor the habitual restlessness and rapine of mountaineers, as on the old borders of Scotland, nor the occasional struggle of a strong peaceful nation for its life, as in the wars of the Swiss with Austria. Nor the contest of merely ambitious nations for extent of power, as in the wars of France under Napoleon, or the just terminated war in America. None of these forms of war build anything but tombs. But the creative or foundational war is that in which the natural restlessness and love of contest among men are disciplined, by consent, into modes of beautiful, though it may be fatal, play, in which the natural ambition and love of power of men are disciplined into the aggressive conquest of surrounding evil, and in which the natural instincts of self-defense are sanctified by the nobleness of the institutions, and purity of the households, which they are appointed to defend. To such war as this all men are born, in such war as this any man may happily die. And forth from such war as this have arisen throughout the extent of past ages, all the highest sanctities and virtues of humanity. I shall therefore divide the war of which I would speak to you into three heads. War for exercise or play, war for dominion, and war for defense. And first, of war for exercise or play. I speak of it primarily in this light, because, through all past history, manly war has been more an exercise than anything else, among the classes who cause, and proclaim it. It is not a game to the conscript, or the press sailor. But neither of these are the causers of it. To the governor who determines that war shall be, and to the youths who voluntarily adopt it as their profession, it has always been a grand pastime, and chiefly pursued because they had nothing else to do. And this is true without any exception. No king whose mind was fully occupied with the development of the inner resources of his kingdom, or with any other sufficing subject of thought, ever entered into war but on compulsion. No youth who was earnestly busy with any peaceful subject of study, or set on any serviceable course of action, ever voluntarily became a soldier. Occupy him early, and wisely, in agriculture or business, in science or in literature, and he will never think of war otherwise than as a calamity. But leave him idle, and, the more brave and active and capable he is by nature, the more he will thirst for some appointed field for action, and find, in the passion and peril of battle, the only satisfying fulfillment of his unoccupied being. And from the earliest incipient civilization until now, the population of the earth divides itself, when you look at it widely, into two races, one of workers, and the other of players, one tilling the ground, manufacturing, building, and otherwise providing for the necessities of life. The other part proudly idle, and continually therefore needing recreation, in which they use the productive and laborious orders partly as their cattle, and partly as their puppets or pieces in the game of death. Now, remember, whatever virtue or goodliness there may be in this game of war, rightly played, there is none when you thus play it with a multitude of small human pawns. If you, the gentlemen of this or any other kingdom, choose to make your pastime of contest, do so, and welcome. But set not up these unhappy peasant pieces upon the green-fielded board. If the wager is to be of death, lay it on your own heads, not theirs. a goodly struggle in the Olympic dust, though it be the dust of the grave, the gods will look upon, and be with you in. But they will not be with you, if you sit on the sides of the amphitheater, whose steps are the mountains of earth, whose arena its valleys, to urge your peasant millions into gladiatorial war. You also, you tender and delicate women, for whom, and by whose command, all true battle has been, and must ever be, you would perhaps shrink now, though you need not, from the thought of sitting as queens above set lists where the jesting game might be mortal. How much more, then, ought you to shrink from the thought of sitting above a theater pit in which even a few condemned slaves were slaying each other only for your delight? And do you not shrink from the fact of sitting above a theater pit, where, not condemned slaves, but the best and bravest of the poor sons of your people, slay each other, not man to man, as the coupled gladiators, but race to race, in duel of generations? You would tell me, perhaps, that you do not sit to see this, and it is indeed true, that the women of Europe, those who have no heart interests of their own at peril in the contest, draw the curtains of their boxes, and muffle the openings, so that from the pit of the circus of slaughter there may reach them only at intervals a half-heard cry and a murmur as of the wind sighing, when myriads of souls expire. They shut out the death cries, and are happy, and talk wittily among themselves. That is the utter literal fact of what our ladies do in their pleasant lives. Nay, you might answer, speaking for them, we do not let these wars come to pass for our play, nor by our carelessness, we cannot help them. How can any final quarrel of nations be settled otherwise than by war? I cannot now delay, to tell you how political quarrels might be otherwise settled. But grant that they cannot. Grant that no law of reason can be understood by nations. No law of justice submitted to by them, and that, while questions of a few acres, and of petty cash, can be determined by truth and equity, the questions which are to issue in the perishing or saving of kingdoms can be determined only by the truth of the sword, and the equity of the rifle. Grant this, and even then, judge if it will always be necessary for you to put your quarrel into the hearts of your poor, and sign your treaties with peasants' blood. You would be ashamed to do this in your own private position and power. Why should you not be ashamed also to do it in public place and power? If you quarrel with your neighbor, and the quarrel be indeterminable by law, and mortal, you and he do not send your footmen to Battersea Fields to fight it out. Nor do you set fire to his tenants' cottages, nor spoil their goods. You fight out your quarrel yourselves, and at your own danger, if at all. And you do not think it materially affects the arbitrament that one of you has a larger household than the other. So that, if the servants or tenants were brought into the field with their masters, the issue of the contest could not be doubtful? You either refuse the private duel, or you practice it under laws of honor, not of physical force, that so it may be, in a manner, justly concluded. Now the just or unjust conclusion of the private feud is of little moment, while the just or unjust conclusion of the public feud is of eternal moment, and yet, in this public quarrel, you take your servants' sons from their arms to fight for it, and your servants' food from their lips to support it. And the black seals on the parchment of your treaties of peace are the deserted hearth and the fruitless field. There is a ghastly ludicrousness in this, as there is mostly in these wide and universal crimes. Hear the statement of the very fact of it in the most literal words of the greatest of our English thinkers. What, speaking in quite unofficial language, is the net purport and upshot of war? To my own knowledge, for example, there dwell and toil, in the British village of Dumdrudge, usually some 500 souls. From these, by certain natural enemies of the French, there are successively selected, during the French war, say 30 able-bodied men. Dumdrudge, at her own expense, has suckled and nursed them. She has, not without difficulty and sorrow, fed them up to manhood, and even trained them to crafts, so that one can weave, another build, another hammer, and the weakest can stand under 30 stone avoirdupois. Nevertheless, amid much weeping and swearing, they are selected, all dressed in red, and shipped away, at the public charges, some 2,000 miles, or say only to the south of Spain, and fed there till wanted. And now to that same spot in the south of Spain are 30 similar French artisans, from a French dumb drudge, in like manner wending, till at length, after infinite effort, the two parties come into actual juxtaposition, and 30 stands fronting 30, each with a gun in his hand. Straightway the word fire is given, and they blow the souls out of one another, and in place of 60 brisk useful craftsmen, the world has 60 dead carcasses, which it must bury, and anon shed tears for. Had these men any quarrel? Busy as the devil is, not the smallest. They lived far enough apart, were the entirest strangers, nay, in so wide a universe, there was even, unconsciously, by commerce, some mutual helpfulness between them. How then? Simpleton! Their governors had fallen out. And instead of shooting one another, had the cunning to make these poor blockheads shoot. Sartor Resartus. Positively, then, gentlemen, the game of battle must not, and shall not, ultimately be played this way. But should it be played anyway? Should it, if not by your servants, be practiced by yourselves? I think, yes. Both history and human instinct seem alike to say, yes. All healthy men like fighting, and like the sense of danger. All brave women like to hear of their fighting, and of their facing danger. This is a fixed instinct in the fine race of them, and I cannot help fancying that fair fight is the best play for them, and that a tournament was a better game than a steeplechase. The time may perhaps come in France as well as here, for universal hurdle races and cricketing, but I do not think universal crickets will bring out the best qualities of the nobles of either country. I use, in such question, the test which I have adopted, of the connection of war with other arts. And I reflect how, as a sculptor, I should feel, if I were asked to design a monument for a dead knight, in Westminster Abbey, with a carving of a bat at one end, and a ball at the other. It may be the remains in me only of savage Gothic prejudice. But I had rather carve it with a shield at one end, and a sword at the other. And this, observe, with no reference whatever to any story of duty done, or cause defended. Assume the knight merely to have ridden out occasionally to fight his neighbor for exercise. Assume him even a soldier of fortune, and to have gained his bread, and filled his purse, at the sword's point. Still, I feel as if it were, somehow, grander and worthier in him to have made his bread by sword play than any other play, had rather he had made it by thrusting than by batting. Much more, than by betting. Much rather that he should ride war horses, than back race horses, and, I say it sternly and deliberately, much rather would I have him slay his neighbor, than cheat him. But remember, so far as this may be true, the game of war is only that in which the full personal power of the human creature is brought out in management of its weapons. And this for three reasons. First, the great justification of this game is that it truly, when well played, determines who is the best man, who is the highest bred, the most self-denying, the most fearless, the coolest of nerve, the swiftest of eye and hand. You cannot test these qualities wholly, unless there is a clear possibility of the struggles ending in death. It is only in the fronting of that condition that the full trial of the man, soul, and body, comes out. You may go to your game of wickets, or of hurdles, or of cards, and any knavery that is in you may stay unchallenged all the while. But if the play may be ended at any moment by a lance thrust, a man will probably make up his accounts a little before he enters it. Whatever is rotten and evil in him will weaken his hand more in holding a sword hilt, than in balancing a billiard cue, and on the whole, the habit of living lightly hearted, in daily presence of death, always has had, and must have, a tendency both to the making and testing of honest men. But for the final testing, observe, you must make the issue of battle strictly dependent on fineness of frame, and firmness of hand. You must not make it the question, which of the combatants has the longest gun, or which has got behind the biggest tree, or which has the wind in his face, or which has gunpowder made by the best chemist, or iron smelted with the best coal, or the angriest mob at his back. Decide your battle, whether of nations, or individuals, on those terms, and you have only multiplied confusion, and added slaughter to iniquity. But decide your battle by pure trial, which has the strongest arm, and steadiest heart, and you have gone far to decide a great many matters besides, and to decide them rightly. And the other reasons for this mode of decision of cause, are the diminution both of the material destructiveness, or cost, and of the physical distress of war. For you must not think that in speaking to you in this, as you may imagine, fantastic praise of battle, I have overlooked the conditions weighing against me. I pray all of you, who have not read, to read with the most earnest attention, Mr. Helps's 2 essays on war and government, in the first volume of the last series of Friends in Council. Everything that can be urged against war is there simply, exhaustively, and most graphically stated. And all, there urged, is true. But the 2 great counts of evil alleged against war by that most thoughtful writer, hold only against modern war. If you have to take away masses of men from all industrial employment, to feed them by the labor of others, to move them and provide them with destructive machines, varied daily in national rivalship of inventive cost. If you have to ravage the country which you attack, to destroy for a score of future years, its roads, its woods, its cities, and its harbors. And if, finally, having brought masses of men, counted by hundreds of thousands, face to face, you tear those masses to pieces with jagged shot, and leave the fragments of living creatures countlessly beyond all help of surgery, to starve and parch, through days of torture, down into clots of clay. What book of accounts shall record the cost of your work, what book of judgment sentence the guilt of it? That, I say, is modern war, scientific war, chemical and mechanic war, worse even than the savage's poisoned arrow. And yet you will tell me, perhaps, that any other war than this is impossible now. It may be so, the progress of science cannot, perhaps, be otherwise registered than by new facilities of destruction, and the brotherly love of our enlarging Christianity be only proved by multiplication of murder. Yet hear, for a moment, what war was, in pagan and ignorant days, what war might yet be, if we could extinguish our science in darkness, and join the heathen's practice to the Christian's theory. I read you this from a book which probably most of you know well, and all ought to know, Muller's Dorians, but I have put the points I wish you to remember in closer connection than in his text. The chief characteristic of the warriors of Sparta was great composure and subdued strength. The violence of Aristodemus and Isetas being considered as deserving rather of blame than praise, and these qualities in general distinguished the Greeks from the northern barbarians, whose boldness always consisted in noise and tumult. For the same reason the Spartans sacrificed to the Muses before an action, these goddesses being expected to produce regularity and order in battle, as they sacrificed on the same occasion in Crete to the god of love, as the confirmer of mutual esteem and shame. Every man put on a crown, when the band of flute players gave the signal for attack. All the shields of the line glittered with their high polish, and mingled their splendor with the dark red of the purple mantles, which were meant both to adorn the combatant, and to conceal the blood of the wounded, to fall well and decorously being an incentive the more to the most heroic valor. The conduct of the Spartans in battle denotes a high and noble disposition, which rejected all the extremes of brutal rage. The pursuit of the enemy ceased when the victory was completed, and after the signal for retreat had been given, all hostilities ceased. The spoiling of arms, at least during the battle, was also interdicted, and the consecration of the spoils of slain enemies to the gods, as, in general, all rejoicings for victory, were considered as ill-omened. Such was the war of the greatest soldiers who prayed to heathen gods. What Christian war is, preached by Christian ministers, let any one tell you, who saw the sacred crowning, and heard the sacred flute playing, and was inspired and sanctified by the divinely measured and musical language, of any North American regiment preparing for its charge. And what is the relative cost of life in pagan and Christian wars? Let this one fact tell you: the Spartans won the decisive battle of Corinth with the loss of 8 men, the victors at indecisive Gettysburg confessed to the loss of 30,000. 2. I pass now to our second order of war, the commonest among men, that undertaken in desire of dominion. And let me ask you to think for a few moments what the real meaning of this desire of dominion is, first in the minds of kings, then in that of nations. Now, mind you this first, that I speak either about kings, or masses of men, with a fixed conviction that human nature is a noble and beautiful thing, not a foul nor a base thing. All the sin of men I esteem as their disease, not their nature. As a folly which may be prevented, not a necessity which must be accepted. And my wonder, even when things are at their worst, is always at the height which this human nature can attain. Thinking it high, I find it always a higher thing than I thought it. While those who think it low, find it, and will find it, always lower than they thought it, the fact being, that it is infinite, and capable of infinite height and infinite fall. But the nature of it, and here is the faith which I would have you hold with me, the nature of it is in the nobleness, not in the catastrophe. Take the faith in its utmost terms. When the captain of the London shook hands with his mate, saying God speed you, I will go down with my passengers, that I believe to be human nature. He does not do it from any religious motive, from any hope of reward, or any fear of punishment, he does it because he is a man. But when a mother, living among the fair fields of merry England, gives her 2-year-old child to be suffocated under a mattress in her inner room, while the said mother waits and talks outside, that I believe to be not human nature. You have the two extremes there, shortly. And you, men, and mothers, who are here face to face with me tonight, I call upon you to say which of these is human, and which inhuman, which natural and which unnatural. Choose your creed at once, I beseech you, choose it with unshaken choice, choose it forever. Will you take, for foundation of act and hope, the faith that this man was such as God made him, or that this woman was such as God made her? Which of them has failed from their nature, from their present, possible, actual nature, not their nature of long ago, but their nature of now? Which has betrayed it, falsified it? Did the guardian who died in his trust, die inhumanly, and as a fool, and did the murderess of her child fulfill the law of her being? Choose, I say, infinitude of choices hang upon this. You have had false prophets among you, for centuries you have had them, solemnly warned against them though you were, false prophets, who have told you that all men are nothing but fiends or wolves, half beast, half devil. Believe that and indeed you may sink to that. But refuse that, and have faith that God made you upright, though you have sought out many inventions. So, you will strive daily to become more what your Maker meant and means you to be, and daily gives you also the power to be, and you will cling more and more to the nobleness and virtue that is in you, saying, My righteousness I hold fast, and will not let it go. I have put this to you as a choice, as if you might hold either of these creeds you liked best. But there is in reality no choice for you, the facts being quite easily ascertainable. You have no business to think about this matter, or to choose in it. The broad fact is, that a human creature of the highest race, and most perfect as a human thing, is invariably both kind and true. And that as you lower the race, you get cruelty and falseness, as you get deformity, and this so steadily and assuredly, that the two great words which, in their first use, meant only perfection of race, have come, by consequence of the invariable connection of virtue with the fine human nature, but to signify benevolence of disposition. The word generous, and the word gentle, both, in their origin, meant only of pure race, but because charity and tenderness are inseparable from this purity of blood, the words which once stood only for pride, now stand as synonyms for virtue. Now, this being the true power of our inherent humanity, and seeing that all the aim of education should be to develop this, and seeing also what magnificent self-sacrifice the higher classes of men are capable of, for any cause that they understand or feel, it is wholly inconceivable to me how well-educated princes, who ought to be of all gentlemen the gentlest, and of all nobles the most generous, and whose title of royalty means only their function of doing every man right, How these, I say, throughout history, should so rarely pronounce themselves on the side of the poor and of justice, but continually maintain themselves and their own interests by oppression of the poor, and by wresting of justice. And how this should be accepted as so natural, that the word loyalty, which means faithfulness to law, is used as if it were only the duty of a people to be loyal to their king, and not the duty of a king to be infinitely more loyal to his people. How comes it to pass that a captain will die with his passengers, and lean over the gunwale to give the parting boat its course, but that a king will not usually die with, much less for, his passengers, thinks it rather incumbent on his passengers, in any number, to die for him? Think, I beseech you, of the wonder of this. The sea captain, not captain by divine right, but only by company's appointment, not a man of royal descent, but only a plebeian who can steer. Not with the eyes of the world upon him, but with feeble chance, depending on one poor boat, of his name being ever heard above the wash of the fatal waves? Not with the cause of a nation resting on his act, but helpless to save so much as a child from among the lost crowd with whom he resolves to be lost, yet goes down quietly to his grave, rather than break his faith to these few emigrants. But your captain by divine right, your captain with the hues of 100 shields of kings upon his breast, your captain whose every deed, brave or base, will be illuminated or branded forever before unscapable eyes of men, your captain whose every thought and act are beneficent, or fatal, from sun rising to setting, blessing as the sunshine, or shadowing as the night, this captain, as you find him in history, for the most part thinks only how he may tax his passengers, and sit at most ease in his state cabin. For observe, if there had been indeed in the hearts of the rulers of great multitudes of men any such conception of work for the good of those under their command, as there is in the good and thoughtful masters of any small company of men, not only wars for the sake of mere increase of power could ever take place, but our idea of power itself would be entirely altered. Do you suppose that to think and act even for 1,000,000 of men, to hear their complaints, watch their weaknesses, restrain their vices, make laws for them, lead them, day by day, to purer life, is not enough for one man's work? If any of us were absolute lord only of a district of 100 miles square, and were resolved on doing our utmost for it, making it feed as large a number of people as possible, making every clod productive, and every rock defensive, and every human being happy, should we not have enough on our hands, think you? But if the ruler has any other aim than this, if, careless of the result of his interference, he desire only the authority to interfere, and, regardless of what is ill done or well done, cares only that it shall be done at his bidding, if he would rather do 200 miles space of mischief, than 100 miles space of good, of course he will try to add to his territory, and to add inimitably. But does he add to his power? Do you call it power in a child, if he is allowed to play with the wheels and bands of some vast engine, pleased with their murmur and whirl, till his unwise touch, wandering where it ought not, scatters beam and wheel into ruin? Yet what machine is so vast, so incognosable, as the working of the mind of a nation? What child's touch so wanton, as the word of a selfish king? And yet, how long have we allowed the historian to speak of the extent of the calamity a man causes, as a just ground for his pride? And to extol him as the greatest prince, who is only the center of the widest error? Follow out this thought by yourselves, and you will find that all power, properly so called, is wise and benevolent. There may be capacity in a drifting fire ship to destroy a fleet. There may be venom enough in a dead body to infect a nation, but which of you, the most ambitious, would desire a drifting kinghood, robed in consuming fire, or a poison-dipped scepter whose touch was mortal? There is no true potency, remember, but that of help. Nor true ambition, but ambition to save. And then, observe farther, this true power, the power of saving, depends neither on multitude of men, nor on extent of territory. We are continually assuming that nations become strong according to their numbers. They indeed become so, if those numbers can be made of one mind, but how are you sure you can stay them in one mind, and keep them from having north and south minds? Grant them unanimous, how know you they will be unanimous in right? If they are unanimous in wrong, the more they are, essentially the weaker they are. Or, suppose that they can neither be of one mind, nor of two minds, but can only be of no mind. Suppose they are a more helpless mob, tottering into precipitant catastrophe, like a wagon load of stones when the wheel comes off. Dangerous enough for their neighbors, certainly, but not powerful. Neither does strength depend on extent of territory, any more than upon number of population. Take up your maps when you go home this evening, put the cluster of British Isles beside the mass of South America, and then consider whether any race of men need care how much ground they stand upon. The strength is in the men, and in their unity and virtue, not in their standing room. A little group of wise hearts is better than a wilderness full of fools, and only that nation gains true territory, which gains itself. And now for the brief practical outcome of all this. Remember, no government is ultimately strong, but in proportion to its kindness and justice, and that a nation does not strengthen, by merely multiplying and diffusing itself. We have not strengthened as yet, by multiplying into America. Nay, even when it has not to encounter the separating conditions of emigration, a nation need not boast itself of multiplying on its own ground, if it multiplies only as flies or locusts do, with the god of flies for its god. It multiplies its strength only by increasing as one great family, in perfect fellowship and brotherhood. And lastly, it does not strengthen itself by seizing dominion over races whom it cannot benefit. Austria is not strengthened, but weakened, by her grasp of Lombardy. And whatever apparent increase of majesty and of wealth may have accrued to us from the possession of India, whether these prove to us ultimately power or weakness, depends wholly on the degree in which our influence on the native race shall be benevolent and exalting. But, as it is at their own peril that any race extends their dominion in mere desire of power, so it is at their own still greater peril, that they refuse to undertake aggressive war, according to their force, whenever they are assured that their authority would be helpful and protective. Nor need you listen to any sophistical objection of the impossibility of knowing when a people's help is needed, or when not. Make your national conscience clean, and your national eyes will soon be clear. No man who is truly ready to take part in a noble quarrel will ever stand long in doubt by whom, or in what cause, his aid is needed. I hold it my duty to make no political statement of any special bearing in this presence. But I tell you broadly and boldly, that, within these last 10 years, we English have, as a knightly nation, lost our spurs. We have fought where we should not have fought, for gain, and we have been passive where we should not have been passive, for fear. I tell you that the principle of non-intervention, as now preached among us, is as selfish and cruel as the worst frenzy of conquest, and differs from it only by being not only malignant, but dastardly. I know, however, that my opinions on this subject differ too widely from those ordinarily held, to be any farther intruded upon you, and therefore I pass lastly to examine the conditions of the third kind of noble war. War waged simply for defense of the country in which we were born, and for the maintenance and execution of her laws, by whomsoever threatened or defied. It is to this duty that I suppose most men entering the army consider themselves in reality to be bound, and I want you now to reflect what the laws of mere defense are, and what the soldier's duty, as now understood, or supposed to be understood. You have solemnly devoted yourselves to be English soldiers, for the guardianship of England. I want you to feel what this vow of yours indeed means, or is gradually coming to mean. You take it upon you, first, while you are sentimental schoolboys. You go into your military convent, or barracks, just as a girl goes into her convent while she is a sentimental schoolgirl. Neither of you then know what you are about, though both the good soldiers and good nuns make the best of it afterwards. You don't understand perhaps why I call you sentimental schoolboys, when you go into the army. Because, on the whole, it is love of adventure, of excitement, of fine dress and of the pride of fame, all which are sentimental motives, which chiefly make a boy like going into the guards better than into a counting house. You fancy, perhaps, that there is a severe sense of duty mixed with these peacocky motives? And in the best of you, there is, but do not think that it is principal. If you cared to do your duty to your country in a prosaic and unsentimental way, depend upon it, there is now truer duty to be done in raising harvests than in burning them. More in building houses, than in shelling them, more in winning money by your own work, wherewith to help men, than in taxing other people's work, for money wherewith to slay men. More duty finally, in honest and unselfish living than in honest and unselfish dying, though that seems to your boy's eyes the bravest. So far then, as for your own honor, and the honor of your families, you choose brave death in a red coat before brave life in a black one, you are sentimental. And now see what this passionate vow of yours comes to. For a little while you ride, and you hunt tigers or savages, you shoot, and are shot, you are happy, and proud, always, and honored and wept if you die, and you are satisfied with your life, and with the end of it. Believing, on the whole, that good rather than harm of it comes to others, and much pleasure to you. But as the sense of duty enters into your forming minds, the vow takes another aspect. You find that you have put yourselves into the hand of your country as a weapon. You have vowed to strike, when she bids you, and to stay scabbarded when she bids you. All that you need answer for is, that you fail not in her grasp. And there is goodness in this, and greatness, if you can trust the hand and heart of the Britomart who has braced you to her side, and are assured that when she leaves you sheathed in darkness, there is no need for your flash to the sun. But remember, good and noble as the state may be, it is a state of slavery. There are different kinds of slaves and different masters. Some slaves are scourged to their work by whips, others are scourged to it by restlessness or ambition. It does not matter what the whip is. It is none the less a whip, because you have cut thongs for it out of your own souls. The fact, so far, of slavery, is in being driven to your work without thought, at another's bidding. Again, some slaves are bought with money, and others with praise. It matters not what the purchase money is. The distinguishing sign of slavery is to have a price, and be bought for it. Again, it matters not what kind of work you are set on. Some slaves are set to forced diggings, others to forced marches, some dig furrows, others field works, and others graves. Some press the juice of reeds, and some the juice of vines, and some the blood of men. The fact of the captivity is the same whatever work we are set upon, though the fruits of the toil may be different. But, remember, in thus vowing ourselves to be the slaves of any master, it ought to be some subject of forethought with us, what work he is likely to put us upon. You may think that the whole duty of a soldier is to be passive, that it is the country you have left behind who is to command, and you have only to obey. But are you sure that you have left all your country behind, or that the part of it you have so left is indeed the best part of it? Suppose, and, remember, it is quite conceivable, that you yourselves are indeed the best part of England, that you who have become the slaves, ought to have been the masters, and that those who are the masters, ought to have been the slaves. If it is a noble and whole-hearted England, whose bidding you are bound to do, it is well, but if you are yourselves the best of her heart, and the England you have left be but a half-hearted England, how say you of your obedience? You were too proud to become shopkeepers, are you satisfied then to become the servants of shopkeepers? You were too proud to become merchants or farmers yourselves, will you have merchants or farmers then for your field marshals? You had no gifts of special grace for Exeter Hall, will you have some gifted person thereat for your commander-in-chief, to judge of your work, and reward it? You imagine yourselves to be the army of England, how if you should find yourselves, at last, only the police of her manufacturing towns, and the beadles of her little Bethels? It is not so yet, nor will be so, I trust, forever. But what I want you to see, and to be assured of, is, that the ideal of soldiership is not mere passive obedience and bravery, that, so far from this, no country is in a healthy state which has separated, even in a small degree, her civil from her military power. All states of the world, however great, fall at once when they use mercenary armies. And although it is a less instant form of error, because involving no national taint of cowardice, it is yet an error no less ultimately fatal. It is the error especially of modern times, of which we cannot yet know all the calamitous consequences, to take away the best blood and strength of the nation, all the sole substance of it that is brave, and careless of reward, and scornful of pain, and faithful in trust, and to cast that into steel, and make a mere sword of it, taking away its voice and will. But to keep the worst part of the nation, whatever is cowardly, avaricious, sensual, and faithless, and to give to this the voice, to this the authority, to this the chief privilege, where there is least capacity of thought. The fulfillment of your vow for the defense of England will by no means consist in carrying out such a system. You are not true soldiers, if you only mean to stand at a shop door, to protect shop boys who are cheating inside. A soldier's vow to his country is that he will die for the guardianship of her domestic virtue, of her righteous laws, and of her anyway challenged or endangered honor. A state without virtue, without laws, and without honor, he is bound not to defend. Nay, bound to redress by his own right hand that which he sees to be base in her. So sternly is this the law of nature and life, that a nation once utterly corrupt can only be redeemed by a military despotism, never by talking, nor by its free effort. And the health of any state consists simply in this, that in it, those who are wisest shall also be strongest, its rulers should be also its soldiers, or, rather, by force of intellect more than of sword, its soldiers its rulers. Whatever the hold which the aristocracy of England has on the heart of England, in that they are still always in front of her battles, this hold will not be enough, unless they are also in front of her thoughts. And truly her thoughts need good captains leading now, if ever. Do you know what, by this beautiful division of labor, her brave men fighting, and her cowards thinking, she has come at last to think? Here is a bit of paper in my hand, 6 a good one too, and an honest one, quite representative of the best common public thought of England at this moment. And it is holding forth in one of its leaders upon our social welfare, upon our vivid life, upon the political supremacy of Great Britain. And what do you think all these are owing to? To what our English sires have done for us, and taught us, age after age? No, not to that. To our honesty of heart, or coolness of head, or steadiness of will. No, not to these. To our thinkers, or our statesmen, or our poets, or our captains, or our martyrs, or the patient labor of our poor. No, not to these, or at least not to these in any chief measure. Nay, says the journal, more than any agency, it is the cheapness and abundance of our coal which have made us what we are. If it be so, then ashes to ashes be our epitaph. And the sooner the better. I tell you, gentlemen of England, if ever you would have your country breathe the pure breath of heaven again, and receive again a soul into her body, instead of rotting into a carcass, blown up in the belly with carbonic acid, and great that way, you must think, and feel, for your England, as well as fight for her. You must teach her that all the true greatness she ever had, or ever can have, she won while her fields were green and her faces ruddy, that greatness is still possible for Englishmen, even though the ground be not hollow under their feet, nor the sky black over their heads. And that, when the day comes for their country to lay her honors in the dust, her crest will not rise from it more loftily because it is dust of coal. Gentlemen, I tell you, solemnly, that the day is coming when the soldiers of England must be her tutors and the captains of her army, captains also of her mind. And now, remember, you soldier youths, who are thus in all ways the hope of your country. Or must be, if she have any hope, remember that your fitness for all future trust depends upon what you are now. No good soldier in his old age was ever careless or indolent in his youth. Many a giddy and thoughtless boy has become a good bishop, or a good lawyer, or a good merchant. But no such an one ever became a good general. I challenge you, in all history, to find a record of a good soldier who was not grave and earnest in his youth. And, in general, I have no patience with people who talk about the thoughtlessness of youth indulgently. I had infinitely rather hear of thoughtless old age, and the indulgence due to that. When a man has done his work, and nothing can any way be materially altered in his fate, let him forget his toil, and jest with his fate, if he will. But what excuse can you find for willfulness of thought, at the very time when every crisis of future fortune hangs on your decisions? A youth thoughtless, when all the happiness of his home forever depends on the chances, or the passions, of an hour. A youth thoughtless, when the career of all his days depends on the opportunity of a moment. A youth thoughtless, when his every act is a foundation stone of future conduct, and every imagination a fountain of life or death. Be thoughtless in any after years, rather than now, though, indeed, there is only one place where a man may be nobly thoughtless, his deathbed. No thinking should ever be left to be done there. Having, then, resolved that you will not waste recklessly, but earnestly use, these early days of yours, remember that all the duties of her children to England may be summed in two words, industry, and honor. I say first, industry, for it is in this that soldier youth are especially tempted to fail. Yet surely, there is no reason because your life may possibly or probably be shorter than other men's, that you should therefore waste more recklessly the portion of it that is granted you. Neither do the duties of your profession, which require you to keep your bodies strong, in any wise involve the keeping of your minds weak. So far from that, the experience, the hardship, and the activity of a soldier's life render his powers of thought more accurate than those of other men. And while, for others, all knowledge is often little more than a means of amusement, there is no form of science which a soldier may not at some time or other find bearing on business of life and death. A young mathematician may be excused for languor in studying curves to be described only with a pencil, but not in tracing those which are to be described with a rocket. Your knowledge of a wholesome herb may involve the feeding of an army, and acquaintance with an obscure point of geography, the success of a campaign. Never waste an instant's time, therefore. The sin of idleness is 1,000-fold greater in you than in other youths, for the fates of those who will one day be under your command hang upon your knowledge. Lost moments now will be lost lives then, and every instant which you carelessly take for play, you buy with blood. But there is one way of wasting time, of all the vilest, because it wastes, not time only, but the interest and energy of your minds. Of all the ungentlemanly habits into which you can fall, the vilest is betting, or interesting yourselves in the issues of betting. It unites nearly every condition of folly and vice. You concentrate your interest upon a matter of chance, instead of upon a subject of true knowledge. And you back opinions which you have no grounds for forming, merely because they are your own. All the insolence of egotism is in this. And so far as the love of excitement is complicated with the hope of winning money, you turn yourselves into the basest sort of tradesmen, those who live by speculation. Were there no other ground for industry, this would be a sufficient one. That it protected you from the temptation to so scandalous a vice. Work faithfully, and you will put yourselves in possession of a glorious and enlarging happiness, not such as can be won by the speed of a horse, or marred by the obliquity of a ball. First, then, by industry you must fulfill your vow to your country, but all industry and earnestness will be useless unless they are consecrated by your resolution to be in all things men of honor, not honor in the common sense only, but in the highest. Rest on the force of the two main words in the great verse, integer vitae, celerius purus. You have vowed your life to England, give it her holy, a bright, stainless, perfect life, a knightly life. Because you have to fight with machines instead of lances, there may be a necessity for more ghastly danger, but there is none for less worthiness of character, than in olden time. You may be true knights yet, though perhaps not equites. You may have to call yourselves canonry instead of chivalry, but that is no reason why you should not call yourselves true men. So the first thing you have to see to in becoming soldiers is that you make yourselves wholly true. Courage is a mere matter of course among any ordinarily well-born youths, but neither truth nor gentleness is matter of course. You must bind them like shields about your necks, you must write them on the tables of your hearts. Though it be not exacted of you, yet exacted of yourselves, this vow of stainless truth. Your hearts are, if you leave them unstirred, as tombs in which a god lies buried. Vow yourselves crusaders to redeem that sacred sepulchre. And remember, before all things, for no other memory will be so protective of you, that the highest law of this knightly truth is that under which it is vowed to women. Whomsoever else you deceive, whomsoever you injure, whomsoever you leave unaided, you must not deceive, nor injure, nor leave unaided according to your power, any woman of whatever rank. Believe me, every virtue of the higher phases of manly character begins in this. In truth and modesty before the face of all maidens, in truth and pity, or truth and reverence, to all womanhood. And now let me turn for a moment to you, wives and maidens, who are the souls of soldiers, to you, mothers, who have devoted your children to the great hierarchy of war. Let me ask you to consider what part you have to take for the aid of those who love you, for if you fail in your part they cannot fulfill theirs. Such absolute helpmates you are that no man can stand without that help, nor labor in his own strength. I know your hearts, and that the truth of them never fails when an hour of trial comes which you recognize for such. But you know not when the hour of trial first finds you, nor when it verily finds you. You imagine that you are only called upon to wait and to suffer, to surrender and to mourn. You know that you must not weaken the hearts of your husbands and lovers, even by the one fear of which those hearts are capable, the fear of parting from you, or of causing you grief. Through weary years of separation, through fearful expectancies of unknown fate, through the tenfold bitterness of the sorrow which might so easily have been joy, and the tenfold yearning for glorious life struck down in its prime, through all these agonies you fail not, and never will fail. But your trial is not in these. To be heroic in danger is little. You are English women. To be heroic in change and sway of fortune is little, for do you not love? To be patient through the great chasm and pause of loss is little, for do you not still love in heaven? But to be heroic in happiness, to bear yourselves gravely and righteously in the dazzling of the sunshine of morning, not to forget the God in whom you trust, when he gives you most, not to fail those who trust you, when they seem to need you least, this is the difficult fortitude. It is not in the pining of absence, not in the peril of battle, not in the wasting of sickness, that your prayer should be most passionate, or your guardianship most tender. Pray, mothers and maidens, for your young soldiers in the bloom of their pride. Pray for them, while the only dangers round them are in their own wayward wills. Watch you, and pray, when they have to face, not death, but temptation. But it is this fortitude also for which there is the crowning reward. Believe me, the whole course and character of your lovers lives is in your hands. What you would have them be, they shall be, if you not only desire to have them so, but deserve to have them so, for they are but mirrors in which you will see yourselves imaged. If you are frivolous, they will be so also. If you have no understanding of the scope of their duty, they also will forget it. They will listen, they can listen, to no other interpretation of it than that uttered from your lips. Bid them be brave, they will be brave for you. Bid them be cowards, and how noble soever they be, they will quail for you. Bid them be wise, and they will be wise for you. Mock at their counsel, they will be fools for you. Such and so absolute is your rule over them. You fancy, perhaps, as you have been told so often, that a wife's rule should only be over her husband's house, not over his mind. Ah, no. The true rule is just the reverse of that. A true wife, in her husband's house, is his servant. It is in his heart that she is queen. Whatever of the best he can conceive, it is her part to be. Whatever of highest he can hope, it is hers to promise. All that is dark in him she must purge into purity, all that is failing in him she must strengthen into truth. From her, through all the world's clamor, he must win his praise. In her, through all the world's warfare, he must find his peace. And, now, but one word more. You may wonder, perhaps, that I have spoken all this night in praise of war. Yet, truly, if it might be, I, for one, would fain join in the cadence of hammer strokes that should beat swords into plowshares, and that this cannot be, is not the fault of us men. It is your fault. Wholly yours. Only by your command, or by your permission, can any contest take place among us. And the real, final, reason for all the poverty, misery, and rage of battle, throughout Europe, is simply that you women, however good, however religious, however self-sacrificing for those whom you love, are too selfish and too thoughtless to take pains for any creature out of your own immediate circles. You fancy that you are sorry for the pain of others. Now I just tell you this, that if the usual course of war, instead of unroofing peasants' houses, and ravaging peasants' fields, merely broke the china upon your own drawing-room tables, no war in civilized countries would last a week. I tell you more, that at whatever moment you chose to put a period to war, you could do it with less trouble than you take any day to go out to dinner. You know, or at least you might know if you would think, that every battle you hear of has made many widows and orphans. We have, none of us, heart enough truly to mourn with these. But at least we might put on the outer symbols of mourning with them. Let but every Christian lady who has conscience toward God, vow that she will mourn, at least outwardly, for his killed creatures. Your praying is useless, and your church-going mere mockery of God, if you have not plain obedience in you enough for this. Let every lady in the upper classes of civilized Europe simply vow that, while any cruel war proceeds, she will wear black. A mute's black, with no jewel, no ornament, no excuse for, or evasion into, prettiness. I tell you again, no war would last a week. And lastly, you women of England are all now shrieking with one voice, you and your clergymen together, because you hear of your Bibles being attacked. If you choose to obey your Bibles, you will never care who attacks them. It is just because you never fulfill a single downright precept of the book, that you are so careful for its credit, and just because you don't care to obey its whole words, that you are so particular about the letters of them. The Bible tells you to dress plainly, and you are mad for finery. The Bible tells you to have pity on the poor, and you crush them under your carriage wheels. The Bible tells you to do judgment and justice, and you do not know, nor care to know, so much as what the Bible word justice means.